Hello everyone, and welcome back to Translationborne, the show about translation, Bloodborne, and the translation of Bloodborne, this time starting with a rune that has something special to communicate. Embrace of the Beast. The gentle embrace was discovered at the end of repeated experiments for the sake of controlling the beast ailment. The attempt itself failed, and now embrace is one of the strictly forbidden letters. But direct knowledge of that, indeed, has become a cornerstone of the healing church. Those under this contract take on the form of a dreadful beast, and the effects of beast transformation are also temporarily heightened. However, the true nature of that will likely only appear precisely with a bestial weapon. And it's that final section of the description, particularly the bit about a bestial weapon, that I want to dig into first. Before we look too closely at the text, though, I want to demonstrate the in-game effects that are being hinted at. So now that I've returned to the Hunter's Dream, I'm going to head straight to the storage box and get out the Beast Claw for a bit of a before and after comparison. It's been a long time since we discussed this weapon back in Translationborne 57, and I don't think I've ever actually equipped it to show you its moveset before. That's about to change, because it's important to note a couple different visual aspects of this weapon when we use it without first equipping the Beast's Embrace rune. First, consider the look of a quick string of attacks generated by repeatedly pressing R1. Now watch as I transform the weapon. You see how my hands and arms turned into those of a beast? That's also an important visual detail, though of course if I end the transformation or switch back to the Tonitrus, it goes away. But now that we've gotten a sense for what the Beast Claw is like without the Beast's Embrace rune, watch what happens if I memorize the rune in question without the Beast Claw equipped. As you can see, my character seems to have fully transformed into a beast, though nothing special has happened with the Tonitrus moveset. If I switch back to the Beast Claw though, that string of R1 attacks looks pretty different, to say nothing of what happens if I transform the weapon. The end result is what many players first imagined they might see when they first read about stats tied to beast transformation, a way to have their character become beast-like as they embrace the animal within. Having seen that unique interaction between the rune and the weapon though, let's turn our attention back to how the game communicates that to players. Notably, it's not mentioned as the rune's in-game effect, which instead makes it seem like a weaker version of the beast rune. Nor is the info part of the quick description, which highlights the visual transformation but doesn't go into any mechanical details. So the only in-game prompt for players about using the Beast Claw with this rune comes in the final line of the full description. That makes this the most important aspect of the line to preserve in translation, and I believe that clarity of purpose helps this serve as a great example of how translation is more about conveying underlying meanings than it is matching dictionary definitions from one language to another. After all, the actual wording of the official English version has little in common with the Japanese. For one thing, the English combines this crucial mechanical information with that of the prior statement, whereas the Japanese separates the two. Furthermore, the Japanese leverages existing terminology in a way the official English doesn't. Consider how the phrase used to indirectly describe the Beast Claw in Japanese is Jusei no Buki, and the term Jusei is the same as for the Beasthood stat, appearing in the descriptions of both the Beast Blood Pellets and the Beast Claw itself. Through a set of double meanings then, what could be taken simply as a description of a brutal weapon can also be read as a weapon of the Beasthood mechanic, or, failing that, a weapon of beastly nature, based on the kanji. Meanwhile, the official translation simply makes a relatively straightforward reference to a beast weapon. On the other hand, by mentioning how transformation effects are accentuated while wielding the Beast Claw, rather than bringing up the true nature of the rune manifesting, the translators have arguably given English-speaking players a stronger understanding of the theming behind the mechanics, because the wording both hints at the boost to the Beasthood meter, while also implying that the moveset brought out in combination with the Beast Claw is part of an enhanced transformation. But for all these differences in the specifics of how each language presents this information, both serve the crucial function of providing players with a hint about the unique result of combining the Beast's Embrace rune with the Beast Claw, and that's really the most important thing. I find that to be fairly representative of translation in general, but the particular clarity of purpose in this case helps make that easier to see. Having considered the mechanical aspects of this rune though, I want to focus now on the implications it may have for the lore. Thankfully, this is an instance where I think the text on its own is fairly clear. In the first portion of the description, we learn that embrace, a rune which can be characterized as gentle or kind, was discovered after multiple experiments for controlling the plague of beasts. Both languages state this straightforwardly, and I believe both manage to suggest the idea that channeling the inner beast rather than fighting it was seen as the potential key to retaining one's humanity. Then we learn in the second section that the trial or implementation failed, so presumably there was some actual attempt made to employ the rune to control the beastly scourge. As a result, Beast's Embrace is now forbidden, much like the Beast rune with which it shares a mechanical function. Even so, knowledge of either the Beast's Embrace rune or possibly its failed implementation became a crucial element in the metaphorical construction of the Healing Church. Again, all of this strikes me as having been communicated equally well by the English and the Japanese text. For me, the real question is, how much can we read into this specific rune being dropped by Laurence? After all, if we take it that he had this rune memorized before we defeated him, it's possible that it was his use of it that constituted the failed attempt to embrace the beast within we just read about in the description. And if we extrapolate a little more, we can imagine that as the first vicar, Laurence directed the experiments in controlling the beastly scourge, came to the hypothesis that the rune which symbolized the embrace of the inner beast could be used to preserve his humanity, and decided to test that theory himself. When he ultimately transformed into a beast, his failure then resulted in the banning of the rune, but remained instrumental in shaping the organization that we know as the Healing Church, as indicated by his beastly skull being preserved on the altar of the Grand Cathedral, and used as the vector for communicating the adage to future vicars. If you're so inclined then, this rune could play an interesting role in how you understand the complete story of Laurence. However, that involves a lot of interpretation. It's also possible that we're meant to understand the acquisition of the rune purely on a metaphorical level, symbolizing Laurence's willingness to work with powerful forces outside his full control or understanding, and giving us some related information about the Healing Church's history. In the end, his story remains ambiguous, as does that of Valtr here.
Hello, Confederate. Your eyes say all. You've crushed vermin time and time again. You've seen the filth that varnishes the world of man. Yet, you are unbroken. You've the eyes of a hunter. You have blessed the League with your presence. This was my last, most pressing task.
What do you mean? Are you leaving?
My Confederate, promise me you'll crush all vermin to rid us of our impurities for the sake of our fellows, all blood-stained hunters of the League.
Oh, sure. Like I don't have enough to do with the Nightmare Newborn and the Red Moon. In all seriousness, though, Valtr passing on his mission to us based on our demonstrable dedication to it strikes me as fully in line with the themes of inheritance we've seen in Bloodborne, particularly when paralleled with the storylines for the Executioners and the Hunters of Hunters. We'll see more evidence of this when we examine the item Valtr left for us later, but in the meantime I want to return to the theme of presenting information differently to achieve the same effect in translation. Valtr's opening lines make for another great example of this principle at work, in part because they make it easy to see how awkward a more literal version would sound. We need look no further than the phrase, "Your eyes have become good," in the first line for an example of this. What concerns me still more about that particular wording, though, is that it could easily invite misunderstanding. Valtr isn't remarking on an improvement in our vision here. He's getting at an underlying change in our character that's reflected in our eyes, as is made clear by the way he continues in Japanese. Across the next two subtitles, Valtr reiterates his point by stringing together a series of phrases used to describe what exactly he sees in our eyes. The first of these descriptors involves his recounting of the many times we've crushed vermin. The second consists of his noting that we've gotten a good look at the filthiness of the human world, yet remain unbroken by what we've seen. And finally, we get his judgment that our eyes are those of a hunter. So the first line about our eyes becoming good is really meant to set up how Valtr sees all these qualities in our gaze now that weren't necessarily there before. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what the official translation of "Your eyes say it all" does too. It functions as a setup allowing Valtr to elaborate on precisely what he believes our eyes say about us. This in turn does a great job of playing into the idea from a previous dialogue that Valtr can somehow tell what we've done and how our character has changed simply by observing our eyes. It's just a slight change in wording, but for me, there's a clear difference in how well that ongoing aspect of Valtr's character comes across. Also, note how the phrase, "your eyes say it all," frees up the official translators from having to go the same route as the Japanese and combining all the qualities Valtr sees in our eyes into a single lengthy sentence that might be difficult to follow. Instead, they can make the subsequent statements shorter, stronger, and easier to keep straight because they've already established early on that Valtr got this information from his insightful observation of our gaze. For instance, I like the way that translators have mirrored the placement of the idea that we have the eyes of a hunter at the end of the dialogue. If they were following the pattern of one long sentence, they likely would have had to move that idea forward, as my literal version does. Instead, they're able to use this phrase almost as a kind of summary, implying that a hunter would be the sort of person who could crush vermin, witness the filth that varnishes the world of man, yet remain unbroken. Technically, the Japanese doesn't charge the phrase with quite that much meaning, but I think the sentiment fits the game and the situation. Having said that, though, there is one small, possibly unintended aspect of the Japanese phrasing that the English version doesn't capture. In the line where Valtr expresses how many times we've crushed vermin, the Japanese subtitles repeat the verb 5 times. Well, it just so happens that in order to get this dialogue from Valtr, you need to have stamped out a minimum of 5 vermin. In a sense, then, the Japanese phrasing reflects the actual requisite number of vermin you need to destroy for Valtr to recognize your dedication and prowess. In the official English, while time and time again captures the fundamental idea of the repetition involved, it doesn't line up with the quest conditions as nicely as the Japanese. Of course, given the many triumphs of the official English wording, I consider that a small price to pay. Really, it's enough that Valtr acknowledges our tireless efforts to rid the world of vermin, and if you consider the overall effect of the rephrasing on this dialogue as a whole, I think the translators have done a marvelous job. Nor is that the only aspect of their work on Valtr's lines that impresses me. I'm also struck by the way they're able to capture the spirit of the character's final communication to us in the way they structure the first half of the dialogue. You see, looked at grammatically, the opening line of the Japanese sends some potentially mixed signals. It sets up the second sentence with kitto, which is sort of like the word surely in that it expresses a strong belief about a future outcome, even if absolute certainty is impossible. But then it ends with the volitional form commonly used as an invitation to do something. You can hear the potential tension at work in this line if you think of it as, "Shall we proceed to surely wipe out vermin?" Once we consider the line in the context of Valtr's hope for us after he steps down, though, it starts to make a lot more sense. That's why I used "you must surely wipe out bugs" for my literal version, but I like the official use of the phrase "promise me" even better, because it preserves the idea that Valtr is asking for our volition, even as it strongly hints at how he's stepping away from the League and entrusting us with its mission going forward. It's a brilliant solution to what could have been a tricky problem, and once again, it hinges on presenting the underlying ideas uniquely in English. But having spent so long going over Valtr's parting words in such detail, it only seems right that we now turn our attention to the physical object he left behind for us. Iron Helmet of the Boss. An iron helmet resembling a bucket turned upside down. A peephole has been opened in it for just one of 2 eyes, most likely because its original user was probably in a similar state. That is evidence passed down to the boss of the League generation after generation. For a long time now, Valtr had become unable to see bugs. Notice the repeated emphasis on vision? That, for me, is the most engaging thematic aspect of the League's storyline. As we've already noted, the vermin that the League hunt down can only be seen by its members, and now we're learning that its first leader may have literally had a different perspective on the world thanks to their missing an eye. Also, besides the obvious metaphorical significance of that, notice how in accepting and making use of this helmet, it's as if the subsequent Masters of the League are physically adopting that perspective for themselves. What's more, consider the ways in which discovering Valtr has long been unable to see vermin recontextualizes our interactions with him. In the first place, it accentuates the fanaticism of his beliefs, since even after he stopped being able to see the creatures he's convinced are befouling the world, he's still invested in the League's mission and seeks to pass it on. More intriguing for me, though, is the way it emphasizes something we had already observed in his dialogues, his judging our progress as a League member by the look in our eyes. When we know that even if we had crushed a vermin right in front of him, he still wouldn't have been able to act as a witness to what we'd done, his focus on the internal changes to our character from carrying out the mission makes a lot more sense. It also means that rather than receiving any sort of objective verification for our progress through the League, all we have to rely on is the judgment of a man who may be more accurately gauging the progress of our own fanaticism than anything else. It's a great way to reinforce the ambiguity at the heart of the League, the question of whether their perspective of the world is real or sheer madness. Nor is this interplay between the Master's Iron Helm and Valtr's dialogue the only way this item plays into that theme. There's actually another version of this helmet that you can get which is identical in every way except for its name and part of the description. Rather than being called the Master's Iron Helm, it's simply the One-eyed Iron Helm, and while the text of the description lines up perfectly with the opening sections of the Master's Iron Helm, it lacks the final set of lines that describe the helmet as being passed down among Masters of the League and reveal Valtr's inability to see vermin. To me, this functions as an excellent example of how the nature of things can change based on one's perspective. The way you get the One-eyed Iron Helm is by killing Valtr before you've gone through all the steps for him to pass it on to you, meaning that it can be taken as representative of the view of an outsider. After all, someone who doesn't understand the significance of the helmet to members of the League can only perceive it as a bucket-like piece of headgear with a single eye hole. Meanwhile, for those who have fully embraced the League's mission, it serves as a keepsake much like the gold pendant for vicars of the Healing Church. So even though as a physical object the helmet is the same, greater familiarity with the League has fundamentally altered the nature of that object for those with an insider's perspective. For an item tied to the League, which is consistently portrayed as a group whose significance lies in the eye of the beholder, I find this to be a brilliant touch. What's more, the existence of these two versions of the helmet can provide us with an interesting look at a subtle aspect of translation. One of the things that you'll very quickly be confronted with when you start working on video game translation is that the way Japanese writing approaches line breaks is fundamentally different from that of English language writing. This is in part a result of how the Japanese language tends to make more efficient use of screen space, meaning that sentences frequently don't reach the end of a line and so information can be broken up more dynamically. There are other factors at play as well, but what this boils down to is that it's not uncommon for English translations to visually break up text in different ways than the Japanese. That's as true for the Master's Iron Helm as it is for many other aspects of Bloodborne's translation, but as I mentioned earlier, this case gets more interesting if we compare the formatting to that of the One-eyed Iron Helm. There, the Japanese uses a double line break after the first line, just like the official English. That means that while the text of each of these three lines is identical in both English and Japanese across the two items, the presentation of that text changes slightly in the Japanese, but not the English. The effect is subtle, but I believe the translated text does a slightly better job of presenting the Master's Iron Helm as the same physical object perceived differently as a result. Also, regardless of what you make of that specific point, I think it's worth highlighting how even seemingly small aspects of the way things are presented across languages, like line breaks, can merit close consideration and adjustment. Having noted that though, there's one last aspect of the lore indirectly related to this item that I think is worth mentioning. While we sadly won't be able to see it in this playthrough, if you summon Valtr for a boss fight after he passes this helmet on to you, he will be identified not as the Master of the League, but as the Beast Eater. This suggests the tale about a foreigner who devoured a beast that we found out about from the Constable's set, which Valtr wears, was more than just a rumor or fable. Nor is Valtr identified as the Beast Eater exclusively as a summon, since we can see him described as such, using the same slightly unusual kanji for eater, as part of the Whirligig Saw description. Combine that with the discovery of the League's rune inside the forbidden Beast Eater, again with those same kanji, along with the knowledge that the Master's Iron Helm is passed from one League Master to the next, and it seems like we can piece together a good deal of Valtr's story. So while my character bids you farewell, I want to take some extra time to spell that story out. As I understand it, Valtr would have come to Yharnam as part of a group of foreign constables, survived the slaughter of everyone else with him, and consumed the beast responsible. This would then have led to him becoming shunned or forbidden in some fashion, possibly explaining why we find him in the Forbidden Woods, though obviously he would have been welcomed by the League. At some point, he then became the head of that organization, which may have had something to do with his discovering inside himself the rune the League would adopt as its own. Finally, after passing on leadership of the League to us, his return to a private role means he can be identified by his personal epithet when summoned. So that's how I understand the tale of the man who gave us the Master's Iron Helm, as well as what I think of the item itself. Of course, if you feel differently, or if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions to make, I'd love to hear from you. Your feedback is always appreciated. Alternatively, if you want to hear my thoughts on any of the other subjects I've covered so far, check out the Translationborne Index linked below, which should be up to date within 24 hours. Until next time then, thanks for watching everyone.